Okay, this is practice quiz 5. This is a video of me working out practice quiz 5. Now, one thing I want to point out is that there's going to be a couple of formatting changes between the practice quiz in the text and the quiz you're actually going to get on Monday. But those are they're pretty minor, and I'll talk about them in particular. So this is formatted like the text you'll actually receive. So this is the practice quiz from the text, but I just reformatted it in a certain kind of way. Basically what I did here is I moved the analysis questions 11 and 12 to after the multiple choice questions. And the reason I did that is because if you're pretty much on top of things, the multiple choice questions should be a lot faster for you than the analysis questions because you don't have to write out a lot of stuff. And students in the past sometimes have been caught up spending too much time on the analysis questions just because they came first and then they didn't have the time to really go through the multiple choice well. So this way it's just encouraging people to do the multiple choice questions first and then do the analysis questions last. Now, interestingly, even though that's how you should do it on the quiz, as I'm going to fill this out and work through it, I'm going to do the analysis questions before the multiple choice questions. The reason is that having us go through the analysis questions first will make it easier for me to explain the answers when I go through the multiple choice. Okay, because we'll be using the same thought process that I'll go through for the analysis questions to get the answer for the multiple choice questions. Okay, let's get started. So, as always, practice, you want to read everything. There's plenty of time. Just make sure that you got the instructions down and that you understand what's happening. So I'm going to go slow. My name is Rick Grush. I am in section A01. Today's date is November something. I don't remember, but you should remember. Score, I don't know yet. Hopefully 100%. Now I'm going to read these instructions. Quiz has 10 questions. Actually, that's a typo. Bang, we've got 12 questions. Okay. It's worth 100 points, about 11%. Point values are listed in brackets. Also, the points are going to be slightly different. Just slightly. I forget exactly what they are, but these might all be something like 5. These will be 9, and then I think the analysis are 12. But it's just slight differences in point values between the practice quiz and the real quiz you'll get. 5 points in this exam are earned by filling the exam out correctly, which means the stuff I just did, assuming I've got the right date here, which I don't, I'm just going to say it's November 17th, which is probably wrong. By the way, the important thing is not that you get the date right. If you're off by a couple of days on the date, that's not a big deal. The things that are important is to have your name and your section number be correct and that you fill the multiple choice questions out correctly. I'll talk about that in a minute. Those are the important things. If you just get the date, if you're just off by 1 or 2 days, we're not going to harsh you on that. And marking your answers multiple choice on the exam itself. What do I mean? By the way, also on the real quiz you're going to get, there's an additional line here, just like there was on quiz 4, which is do not write the letter of your answer out anywhere on the exam. Just fill in the little square. Don't write A or B or whatever. Okay, that's important. Okay, so I've read the instructions. Now I'm ready to go. According to the syllabus, how can you learn about the scores you get on quizzes and the final? They are posted on TED. No, I don't use TED. Ted's dead, baby. You need to email your TA to ask or go to office hours. No, you can do that, but you don't need to. Scores are posted online, not TED, listed by coded version of your ID number. That's correct. None of the above. Well, that's not correct because C is correct. So I'm just going to fill in C. If I wrote a C out here, that would be a failure to fill the exam out correctly. So I'm not doing that. How can you tell if an argument is appealing to a correlation as a premise. A, it might say every time X has happened, Y has happened. Yeah, that's a way of saying there's a correlation. It might claim that first X occurred, then Y occurred. Yeah, that's another way of doing it. Both A and B, yeah. Neither A nor B, no. So we've got both A and B. There's other ways too, but those are both ways that you can sort of word a premise about a correlation. What's the key problem with an argument that commits an alternate description fallacy? Okay, remember, alternate description is where someone offers a description of some key event or object that's not an appropriate description for the topic. Okay, so let's see. The new description of the object or event is false, and the original description is true. No, that's not correct. The new one could be true. It's just, the problem is that it's not appropriate. Okay, the new description of the object is misleading, while the original description is not misleading. Well, that's better than false, but it's still not really that it's misleading. Let's see what the other answers are. The new description of the object of event is less appropriate. Bing! Yes, that's it. Than the original description for that topic. All of the above. It's not all of the above, it's C. Hey, they're all C. C, C, C for the answers. All right, now, as I promised, instead of doing, I'm going to go back and do these after I've done the analysis questions. You should not do that, though. You should do the multiple choice questions first and then do the analysis questions. Okay, now, piece of advice. For these questions, multiple choice and analysis, but especially the analysis, slow down. When students come into my office hours, one of the biggest issues they have is they start going too fast. They read things too quickly. They start thinking their brain needs to produce an answer to everything within a second and a half. And then maybe the right answer isn't coming. They start panicking. And then there's this bad cycle happens where instead of them just calmly answering the question correctly in 5 minutes, they panic for 10 minutes doing nothing. So take a deep breath, then approach these. Okay, so instructions. For questions 11 and 12, read the passage and answer questions A through D. So this is a difference in the formatting between the quiz you're going to get and the practice quiz. The quiz you're going to get is like this. We're actually breaking this down into 4 parts now to make it easier for you to answer, easier for the TAs to grade. Okay. First step, let's do 11. First step is to read the passage carefully. Okay, so I'm going to stay on Facebook and not move my information over to Google+. I mean, Facebook has 30 times as many people using it, and all my friends are on it. Okay, so before I even look at the questions, I'm already thinking what's going on here. Now, is there an argument here? Yes, there is. Now, this is something I didn't emphasize in lecture or the text a whole lot. It did come up in lecture once, though. But most of the examples of arguments we've seen that I discussed in lecture were where one person is trying to convince another person of something. And usually that's what's happening. However, you can also have an argument where someone is just reporting on the reasoning that led them to decide to do something. Okay, so remember way back from day one in this class, the pizza argument. The girl wasn't trying to convince anybody else to eat the cheese pizza. She picked up the cheese pizza, but we reconstructed her reasoning for doing so. Okay, so here, yeah, there's an argument in the sense of there's premises and a conclusion. This person isn't trying to convince somebody else of something. They're reporting on the argument that convinced them to do something. Right? So this person's telling us why they convinced themselves to stay on Facebook rather than move to Google+. Okay, so there's still an argument here. Okay, so let's go through these. Does the passage contain an argument? Is there more than one reasonable interpretation of the argument? Note any ambiguities. What's the answer? Well, yes, there is an argument here. this person's reporting on the reasoning that led them to stay on Facebook. So I'm just going to say that. Yes, the person is reporting the reasoning, premises and conclusion, right, that led them to stay on Facebook rather than move to Google Plus. Okay, and this would be one to three sentences. Now the question wants you to get it, are there ambiguities? Is there a reasonable way of interpreting this where it's not an argument? Not really. I mean, the person really is giving you the reason why they stayed on Facebook. There's a premise and a conclusion. The premise, we'll get to that in the next step. The premise is 30 times as many people use Facebook. My friends are on it, therefore I stayed on Facebook. Or the good thing for me, the right thing for me to do was to stay on Facebook. Okay, so there's clearly an argument there. Is there maybe more than one argument, or is it ambiguous? I don't really see any ambiguity there either. So in this case, yes, there is an argument, and it's basically an argument to the effect that they want to, reporting on why they stayed on Facebook rather than Google+. Put the argument into standard form. If there's more than one reasonable interpretation, put both in standard form. Okay, well, standard form is just going to be sort of premise-conclusion form. So there's one premise, or maybe two. We could say Facebook has 30 times more users than Google+. Maybe premise two, all my friends are on Facebook. Therefore, three, it was reasonable for me to stay on Facebook, or the best thing for me to do was to stay on Facebook, or that's why I stayed on Facebook. I'll just say that I'll just say I stayed on Facebook. That's close enough. So that's why they stayed on Facebook, is because of these premises. Okay, now let's move on. So we got it in standard form. Next step, determine whether the argument that we've identified has any characteristic features, or does it fit the pattern of any of the informal fallacies. Yes, it does. Fits the pattern of ad populum bandwagoning. The argument fits the pattern of ad hominem bandwagoning, well, because it says that an action should be performed. In this case, staying on Facebook, right? I mean, there's different ways you could word that. I'll just say an action should be performed. You should do something because a lot of people do it. And that's the form of an ad populum bandwagoning, and this has that form, right? Facebook has 30 times more users than Google+, and all my friends are on Facebook. So a lot of people use Facebook, therefore I should stay on Facebook, right? So that's the form of ad hominem bandwagoning. Determine whether the argument you have identified is in fact fallacious. Explain your answer. Okay, well, is it really fallacious? The question is, let's look at the premises and conclusion. This is saying a lot of people use Facebook, and all my friends use Facebook. Therefore, I stay on Facebook. That's a pattern of bandwagoning, right? A lot of people do it, therefore you should do it. The question for part D is, in this context, for this topic, is that really a fallacious move? Here it's not a fallacious move, right? Because this is a social network. And the point of a social network is to be sort of connected on that social network with your friends and with a lot of people. That's kind of the whole point of them. So while in many contexts, the fact that a lot of people do something isn't a reason to do it, in this context it is. That's a good reason to stay on Facebook, is that a lot of people are on it, because the whole point is to be connected to a lot of people. So that's what you do here. Even though the argument fits the pattern of ad hominem bandwagoning, it is not fallacious. The reason is that the point of being on a social network is to connect to all your friends and a lot of people. So the premise about a lot of people doing it is relevant to the conclusion. I'll just say the premises about all the people on Facebook is, underline it, relevant to the conclusion. Okay, super easy. Let's go on to number 12. Step 1, read carefully. The head of the product development division has accused our division of not hiring enough women and minorities. This is total crap. If you look carefully at their records, you'll see that they haven't hired a woman or Latino in over 6 years. Okay, so what's happening here is this person, the person who wrote this or who is saying this, they're responding to somebody else's argument. Who's the somebody else? The head of this other division. So this head of the other division, they did something. They accused, I'll just say us, or whoever wrote this, of doing something. And now this person is replying to their argument. That's kind of what's going on here at a large level. Someone else is saying something, and then this person is replying. Now, when I say the first thing you should do is read carefully, what that means is exactly what I said. You look carefully at what's being said. Now, that doesn't mean that your interpretation is going to be just a meticulous, literal translate, right? Sometimes you have to go beyond what's actually said, right? So remember the Reagan argument from class, right? I've noticed that everyone who's for abortion has already been born. You should read that carefully, but that doesn't mean that your interpretation has to be the literal interpretation. The careful reading's your first step, but then you have to sort of look at what realistically was that person saying. Realistically, were they making an argument, and what kind of argument were they realistically making? So here, let's go through these, A through B. Does the passage contain an argument? Is there more than one reasonable interpretation of the argument? Okay, well, so the head of product development said that our division hasn't hired enough women and minorities. This person is replying to them, this is total crap. So they're saying that, well, what's total crap? That we haven't hired enough women or minorities? Or is it crap that the person just accused us of this? Something like that. But they're not happy with this, and it's clear that they take themselves to be replying to it. How are they replying? If you look carefully at their records, you'll see that they haven't hired a woman or Latino for over 6 years. Well, they're replying by just pointing out that the product development division has itself not done the thing that they're accusing this group of doing. So it looks like an ad hominem tu quoque fallacy. Is there any other way to interpret it? Nah, not realistically. I mean, you could say, well, maybe it's only saying that they're not defending their own behavior. Maybe they're only pointing out that this other group is acting hypocritically. That would be another argument with a different conclusion. It doesn't look like that, because it's not saying, hey, they're total hypocrites. The this is total crap looks like it's saying that this whole accusation is baseless somehow. And the only reason for thinking it's baseless is that they themselves, that group themselves does it, which of course doesn't make it baseless. It's just a tu quoque fallacy. Now, here's the important thing though. I'm going to write this out and I'm going to give my answer as though the only reasonable interpretation is that it's a tu quoque fallacy. There is an argument there, it's tu quoque, that it's not really a realistic interpretation, that they're just saying that they're hypocritical here. But suppose you thought differently. Suppose you read this and you thought that it was like the smoking argument that I used in lecture. You might say, well, two ways to interpret it. It's clearly an argument, but it could be an argument defending their own hiring behavior, or it could be an argument to the effect that the product development division is hypocritical. That's okay too. When you would write these out, you would put both of those. And the person grading it, what they're most concerned about is whether you are manifesting good knowledge of the material in your answer, that your analysis is reasonable, and that how you're reading it is reasonable, and what you're saying for each of the A, B, C, and D is reflecting your knowledge. Okay, it's consistent with that there might be one or two different kind of answers that people might give here. Okay, so don't worry too much about, which one is it? Is it really only one argument, or is it possibly two arguments here? Sometimes it might be ambiguous, and sometimes it really, like this case, I don't think it's very likely that it was an argument about them being hypocritical, just given the wording. But if someone did think there was a possibility that was there in this particular case, I don't think that would be unreasonable either. So I'm not trying to say anything goes. I'm just trying to say that there might be more than one thing someone could say that's reasonable. The important thing that we're looking for is that however you interpret it, it's not unreasonable. You're not like attributing to them something that they clearly didn't say. And that as you sort of spell out your answers to A, B, C, and D, you are manifesting the fact that you sort of understand the material. That's what people are going to be looking for when they're grading this. Okay. So, does it contain an argument? Is there more than one? Note any ambiguities. Yes. The passage contains one argument. It is a defense of the speaker's division's hiring practices. and I might just say comma, against an accusation of poor practices, poor practices brought by another division. Something like that. Okay. Put the argument into standard form. If there's more than one reasonable interpretation, put both arguments. Now, if you thought that this was ambiguous and maybe they were only trying to say that the head of product development was hypocritical, you would say another possibility is that the person is arguing that the head of product development is hypocritical because they are criticizing us for not doing something that they themselves don't do. So you would put that down there too, and that's fine. Okay, put the argument in standard form. If there's more than one reasonable interpretation, put both arguments. Okay, I only think there's one reasonable interpretation here. So I am going to say, here's the form of the argument. Product development has claimed that our hiring practices are bad because we haven't hired enough women or minorities. Premise 2, product development. Okay, sorry about that. My video stopped videotaping, so I'm going to have to complete this sort of part 2 of the video. So where the video stopped, and I actually recorded the whole video. I'm kind of irritated that it stopped because I wasted a lot of time here. But I'm going to go ahead and, so I've already written out the answers. Unfortunately, the video had stopped taping. So I'm just going to, instead of writing these, I'll just read what I have. So where we are now is that we're putting the argument into standard form. And there's one interpretation here, which is that product development has claimed that our hiring practices are bad because we haven't hired enough women or minorities. Premise 2, product development has bad hiring practices in this regard, right? So they themselves do this bad thing. Therefore, our hiring practices are fine, right? They're defending their own hiring practices against this accusation, and that's kind of the form of this argument. Now, let's move on to part C. Again, sorry, I've already written these out, so I'm just going to read what I have. This will be a little faster, but determine whether the argument you've identified has any characteristic features of or fits the pattern of any of the informal fallacies, and briefly explain. So what I have here is, yes, right, it exactly fits the pattern for ad hominem tu quoque, right, which is that someone says you shouldn't do something or accuses you of doing something, and you reply by just pointing out that they do that thing themselves, and that is somehow supposed to defend your own practice. Okay. It defends their own behavior, their hiring behavior against an accusation by simply pointing out that the accuser is vulnerable to the same accusation, right? The accuser is also vulnerable to the accusation that their hiring practices are unfair. So it fits the pattern exactly. Part D, determine whether the arguments you've identified are in fact fallacious. Explain your answer. So here, this is that last part. So we've identified the key premise, right? Our behavior is okay. Why? Because look, they do the same thing. Now the question is the fact that their hiring practices are suspect or bad, is that relevant to whether your hiring practices are suspect or bad? And it's not relevant. So it is committing the fallacy. So the argument is fallacious, right? The argument of the passage that, hey, they accused us of this, but screw them, we're fine. It's a fallacious argument because the hiring practices of the other division are not relevant to whether or not the speaker's division's practices are justifiable. Okay, just not relevant. All right. So those are the analysis questions. Now what I want to do, I'll get to the optional question in a minute. Let's go back now and do the multiple choice questions. Again, I've already filled these out. So, well, you know what? I've got another copy of this exam here, so we can do it this way. There. Now, magically, I haven't filled them out. All right. So, I've read the insurance industry's brief to the effect that allowing high punitive damage settlements encourages groundless litigation without making any significant impact on corporate wrongdoing. So the insurance industry has written some brief with some argument in here. Okay, now this person's going to reply to the insurance industry's argument. While this brief is fascinating, this sort of letter or whatever that the insurance industry wrote, it can't be taken seriously. Why? Well, because the insurance industry is who ultimately has to pay for high settlements, so their argument is flawed. So it's the person who's replying to this is just pointing out that, hey, the insurance industry has an ulterior motive for what they're saying, so let's just discount what they're saying completely. So we don't even have to know too much about the details to sort of realize that this is an ad hominem circumstantial. They're simply pointing out that the insurance industry has an ulterior motive, therefore we should ignore their argument. There's no straw man going on there. They're not re-characterizing the insurance industry's argument in any way. There's no correlation. This isn't one of these fallacies that we're covering, so that can't be right. So it's circumstantial. Next up, conservative groups complain about gun control legislation, claiming that the government has no business telling people what they can and can't do. Okay, so here someone is going to be replying to these conservative groups. These conservative groups have complained about some legislation. They've argued against legislation in a certain kind of way. Now this person's going to reply to those groups. But they, meaning the conservative groups, have no problem supporting legislation that tells people what they can do when it comes to same-sex marriage. Okay. This question isn't the best worded question. In fact, in the next version of the text, I'm going to reword this so it's a little more clear. When I worded it, I attempted it to be, my goal was that, or intention was that this would be an ad hominem tu quoque fallacy. It's not exactly a tu quoque. It's not saying, it is pointing out that they're hypocritical, and that's supposed to be an argument against the conservative group's complaint, right? Like, it's supposed to be kind of like a pro-gun control argument. Why is gun control okay? Well, because this group that's against gun control, their argument is hypocritical in a certain kind of way. They only use this argument when it suits them. So it's kind of pointing out a hypocrisy. It's not the best example of a tu quoque. I'm going to admit that. However, on a quiz, maybe sometimes a question isn't going to be the best example, so you need to know how to deal with that. One way, and this is the beauty of multiple choice, is you just see what's the best answer. You've got 4 options. Even if none of them are perfect, one should be the best. Well, it's clearly not a straw man, right? No one's reframing anybody else's argument, so there's no straw man going on here. We can eliminate that. There's no bandwagoning argument. There's nothing like, a lot of people are doing something, therefore we should do that thing. That's not happening at all. And there's also no alternate description. By the way, I mean to be Xing these out, not selecting them as answers here. There's also no alternate description. Okay, there's no inappropriate or description of some object or event. So that's not happening. And so even if tu quoque isn't great, it's better than these. You can eliminate these answers. So this is, and if you ever do something like this where you're not sure you did something or you want to change your answer, you just want to make sure that the person grading it knows which one you meant, don't write the letter. Again, don't do that. Do something else, but just make it clear that they know what you're doing. Like, circle it, say this one with an arrow, something like that. This one here, exclamation point. Yay. Okay. Next up. Big surprise. Less than a month after the state of California passed a law greatly increasing minimum wage, UC Berkeley announced they were laying off over 500 custodial staff. Immediately, you should be thinking false cause here, because it's pointing out that something happened, then something else happened, that there's a temporal, two events are correlated. A happened, then B happened. Okay. Now, we're going to continue reading and going to continue thinking about it, but at this point, that should pop up in your head as, oh, maybe that's what's going on here. Why can't those liberal idiots see the consequences of their own actions? Okay. Well, it is false cause, right? This isn't really adding anything to the argument other than it's just pointing out that, increasing minimum wage is a liberal kind of policy, and so this policy is bad because it had this bad consequence. Okay, well, the question is, did it really have this consequence? Was this really what caused that? And there's no argument. This is not a good argument to the effect that that was the cause. It's certainly not a straw man. Nothing else is being redescribed. It's not alternate description. It's not no fallacy. Why? Because, see, I did it again. I'm eliminating these by choosing them. That's not the best thing to do. Okay. D. And again, I'm just going to make this clear. This one, exclamation point, pointing at D. Okay. Charles Manson not only killed people for fun, but built a cult of followers who also killed people and worshipped him. That guy is a total psycho. Okay. Not tu quoque. Can eliminate that. And it's also not straw man. You can eliminate that. There's nothing going on that's even remotely like those. Is it ad hominem abusive? Well, there is a kind of, that guy's a psycho, so there is some kind of like verbal abuse going on here, some sort of negative, very negative assessment. But it's not like an ad hominem abusive. It's not saying Manson is a psycho, therefore we can ignore Charles Manson's argument about whatever, right? Charles Manson isn't arguing about anything. So there's no ad hominem abusive argument here. This is no fallacy. There's two ways to interpret this. Either there's no argument, it's just pointing out some things that Charles Manson has done in a feature of his personality, or it is an argument that it's a good one, right? Maybe this is a premise. Premise one, Charles Manson killed people for fun, built a cult of followers, therefore he's a psycho. And that's a pretty good argument. Okay, but either way, there's no fallacy there. There's no way I'm voting for Smith. I can't believe you're going to. Did you read the story about how the CEO of Morgan Stanley was one of the people invited to Smith's daughter's wedding? With those sorts of connections, there's no way Smith can be trusted. So already you should be on the alert for ad hominem association, right? The only thing that's happened here is that we shouldn't trust Smith. Why? And then it's pointing out there's some connection. It's actually a pretty tenuous connection between Smith and this person. It's not abusive. There's no name calling going on, and it's not snobbery. I mean, we can certainly eliminate B and D. There's no, well, only a few people get to do something, therefore let's not trust Smith, right? There's nothing like that. And it's not no fallacy, right? It is arguing that we shouldn't trust Smith. Why? Just because this person was invited to his daughter's wedding. which seems totally irrelevant. So, I mean, even if this guy is untrustworthy who got invited to the wedding, right? Just because someone gets invited to your daughter's wedding doesn't mean you have all of their psychological traits. That's just weird. Number 9. By the way, there's a typo in number 9. I apologize. Instead of in favor of, this should be against. Okay. And 9 is also poorly worded. Again, I apologize for that in the next version of this text, which you won't be around for. Hopefully, this will be fixed. Because there's not only this typo, but there's also, I should have had the 4 options that I had. But let's just read this and see what's going on. Professor Mantooth has argued against prayer in public schools. Now this person's going to reply to that argument. But atheism has been shown to lead to immoral behavior of all sorts. Plus, atheists are more likely to commit crimes and have BO. Okay, so what's going on here is straw man. This person has recharacterized Smith's argument against public schools as atheism. This person now argues against atheism, which wasn't the original point. So there's clearly a straw man thing happening here. Now, in addition to that, you might say, well, there's ad hominem abusive, right? Atheists have BO, therefore we should... but it's not really saying Mantooth has BO, but kind of you might think it's possibly abusive. It's certainly not alternate description or no fallacy. The only possible options are straw man and abusive. Straw man, I think, is the better answer because there is like a clear bad, false recharacterization of the argument, inaccurate characterization. Ideally, I would have not put this as one of the answers, or I would have reframed the question to not include this. But this is good because now you might want to know, what do you do if you get to a question like this and you think, oh, maybe there's 2 answers here? What do you do? Well, first off, if you think there's 2 are possible, but one is clearly better, even though the other one is okay but not great, just pick the one that you think is clearly better. That's the way you should do it. Because we're never intentionally going to make one of these questions have 2 good answers, unless we say so. We'll say more than one answer might be appropriate. But if we don't say that, we're only looking for one answer. But what if they're kind of equal? What do you do? Well, in that case, what you might do is you might put both, and just have a little note, almost like the analysis question. Say, both of these seem reasonable to me, and here's why. And if the person who's grading this looks at these, hopefully that's not going to happen too much. Then maybe they'll give you some partial credit, although we try not to give partial credit on these multiple choice questions. But ideally, this won't happen much. But that's maybe the approach you should take if you find yourself in that position. Okay, number 10. You're taking Latin next quarter. Why? Who takes Latin? Seriously, almost everyone in the dorm is taking abnormal psych. So that's what you should take. Okay, well, there's no alternate description. There's no abusive. Is it no fallacy or is it ad hominem bandwagoning? It looks like bandwagoning to me, right? Everyone's taking this class. A lot of people are taking it. Therefore, you should take it. And so it certainly fits the pattern of bandwagoning. The question is it also really fallacious? Is the fact that a lot of people are taking that class, is that a good reason to take it? Probably not. At least it's not obvious that that's a good reason to take the class. So, bandwagoning fallacy. Okay, so now that that's there, that's all of those. I want to say a little bit about the optional question. So this is, by the way, we're done with the regular quiz now. So anybody who's not doing the optional material can tune out. I just want to very quickly say something about the optional question here, because this will give you an idea of how you should be thinking, the sort of depth of thought you should be having on these things if you're doing the optional material. Explain why, considering whether an argument commits false dichotomy fallacy, the important issue is what the realistic options are and not what all theoretical options are. Hint, think in terms of induction versus deduction. Okay, here's a false dichotomy fallacy. False dichotomy fallacy is I say P or Q, 2, not P, therefore Q. So the argument has the form of a disjunctive syllogism. What makes it fallacious? It's a fallacy if there's another option here. It's really P or Q or R. Because obviously if there's 3 options and I only eliminate one of them, then I can't conclude it's Q because maybe it's R. Right? So that's why this is a fallacy. That's why Q doesn't follow from this. Okay. But the question is, why is it that we only have to consider the realistic options? Right? Why do P, Q, and R need to be realistic ones for us to assess whether this is fallacious? Well, here's why. Suppose P is 60% likely to happen. Suppose Q is 39.99% likely to happen. And suppose R is 0.01% likely. Okay, so this is just an example where they're all theoretically possible options, but R isn't very realistic. Okay, now let's go back to this form here. Suppose someone says P or Q, not P, therefore Q. And someone says, well, wait, that's fallacious because there's really 3 options. Why isn't this fallacious? Well, here's why it's not fallacious. Because look, if I eliminate P and then infer Q, that's still a strong inductive argument because the odds, yeah, I haven't eliminated R, so it's not deductively valid because it's not watertight. Really, Q might not happen. It might really be R. But so it's not deductively valid, but it's still inductively strong because if I eliminate P and R is only 0.01% likely to happen, then Q is still by far the most likely thing. So this is still a strong inductive argument. So that's why if I want to assess, oh, is P or Q, is this committing a false dichotomy fallacy? What I need to assess is, are there third options that are realistic? Just there being a third option like this, say, oh, well, there's a third option, therefore it's not a fallacy. No, it's still a fallacy if this option only has this small of a chance of occurring, right? So that's why, or put it this way, if R is this small, then this is still a good inductive argument. So you shouldn't say this is a fallacy if the third option that exists is really only a theoretical option. It's not very realistic. Okay, so that's the answer there. By the way, I just kind of explained it verbally. You would write that out in some concise way, but that's how you would answer this question. And by the way, hopefully this gives you an idea of kind of how you should be thinking of these fallacies at this point. If you're doing the optional material, you should be on top of things pretty well, and you should be kind of thinking of things at this level of detail. Anyway, that finishes the video, and study hard, and good luck.